green movement has faded away, and the regime has inched to, say, 50% enrichment of LE, low-enriched uranium, and continue to be bellicose towards Israel. I think that likelihood of an Israeli strike goes up higher than 50%. And so I actually think that the likelihood of a strike is directly tied to the intensity of this green movement, which is a very unfair burden to put on them. And I think they're very resentful that how are we expected to change things overnight? You have to give us time. I think that there was a very interesting bit of news to come out of this last IAEA report that was issued a couple of weeks ago, the International Atomic Energy Agency report. And what it said in this report was that Iran's stockpile of uranium, of low-enriched uranium, they usually keep it underground in Natanz, so it's very difficult to bomb it. And they actually, for the first time, came and brought it above ground, and this was kind of inexplicable to most people. That why do they do that now? It's not an open target. It's very easy to hit if you want to hit it. And I think that's precisely why they did it, because I think they also view the leadership of the regime. I think also, as I said, this is a prospect which they would welcome. I think that the Obama administration is, as I said, very sympathetic to this movement. They want to see it succeed. They want to give it time. But the reality is that you have a government in Israel, a prime minister in Israel, who is genuine when he says, he genuinely believes it when he says that Iran represents, quote unquote, an existential threat towards Israel. There was a crisis simulation I participated in a couple of months ago at the Brookings Institute, which is next door to Carnegie. And the premise, it was kind of a war game. The premise of the crisis simulation was that there was three teams. There was an Iranian team, an Israeli team, and a US team. They were very senior officials, former officials from the US participating. And I had the unfortunate task of playing the role of the Iranian Supreme Leader. And so the premise of it, of this crisis simulation, was that Israel bombs Iran's nuclear site without US permission. What happens next? And going through the motions, what I found very, very interesting for me as Supreme Leader, the very first thing I did when Israel bombed Iran was I put all the mangled bodies of men, women, and children on Iranian state television. And even if not one person was killed, I'd take those bodies from the morgue and I put it on state television to elicit this popular nationalistic reaction from people. I put Mousavi, Karoui, and Khatami on state television, and they pledged solidarity with the government. I started to, so the Green Movement is dead. And then I started lobbing missiles into the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, where they keep their oil prices shoot up to over $200. I started to make life difficult for the United States and Afghanistan, Iraq, etc. So basically, when I talk to Israelis about this, I think it's a very easy calculation. I don't think it's actually a very difficult decision. The underlying problem that Israel has with Iran is the character of this regime, much more than its nuclear ambitions. If you bomb Iran's nuclear sites, you at best, according to their own estimates, by 2 to 3 years. You delay Iran's nuclear progress 2 to 3 years. But you buy the regime at least a decade, if not a couple of generations. I think if you do a very simple cost-benefit analysis, the costs severely outweigh any potential benefits. But the problem is Mahmoud Ahmadinejad has a way of getting under people's skin and getting bringing out the worst in people. And I think that the rhetoric of Holocaust denial and the belligerence towards Israel, I think provokes people in a way which elicits disproportionate responses to the threat which actually exists.
Does Obama have any plan to actually provide internet satellite coverage to the Iranian people? Because I know it's extremely hard for Iranians who live in Iran to actually use internet, and their cell phone goes in and out of service all the time. And I think that actually can help them a lot.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. This is something that we've been working on a lot over the course of the last few months, and I think that when I talk to technical experts about this, there's a debate about how well that could work. There's some who will say that there exists, not only with regards to satellite for the internet, but also anti-jamming technology, which will prevent the regime's ability to send parasites to BBC Farsi and Voice of America, things like that. What they've done, there's a bill which was passed in Congress called the Voice Act, which I think sets aside $40 million or something like this sets aside funding for groups or private companies which have either created software which fights the Iranian government's ability to filter the internet, or they are looking at ways of providing this kind of satellite umbrella over the country. But the concern that they have is that they're not sure. I'm not a technical expert when it comes to these things, but I think that the Iranian government has, they do something which basically, they attack the satellite itself, and they prevent the signal from coming down. And what I'm trying to say is that I think that they are reluctant to invest in a very expensive program which takes many, many months to build if it's something that the regime can block very easily. But I can tell you that the one issue in which there is a universal consensus, both among Democrats and Republicans, and I think all the Iranians I've spoken to, and all the Iranians I've spoken to the opposition, is that the most important thing that the United States could do is to prevent the regime's ability to implement this communications embargo, and in any way possible try to aid the Iranians' ability to communicate with one another and with the outside world. So I think that this is something you're going to increasingly hear and read a lot about. Please. Did you learn this one?
What do you think that the future of the green movement is going to be? I mean, in terms of the growing movement of people that is going to survive or is going to die out, what factors determine the progress of this movement?
Please. I can take a couple at a time. Did you have a question as well?
Yeah, just wanted to hear your insights. Sorry for getting back to nuclear policy, but since you have talked about it for the U.S.'s response, and I was wondering what your insights were on the average Iranian citizen's attitude towards pursuit of uranium enrichment, and do they view the U.S.'s attitude as being hypocritical, sort of? Is there room for a nuanced approach maybe on the U.S. side to say, okay, we'll offer to help you with nuclear development of power generation only, but the reactors have to be in a configuration that can't generate plutonium, for instance?
Yeah, very good. Should I take one? I can take one more, and I'll bunch them together. Please.
Considering that China's been resistant to both the sanctions line as well as to most Security Council agreements or compliance issues regarding Iran, does that hint at some sort of long-term potential alliance between China and Iran, away just from the energy incentive from China's perspective? Are China and Iran involved, and potentially with Russia as well, in a wider geostrategic alliance against the West?
How much time do we have? Okay.
And then we can continue the conversation afterwards. We have food and drink for people if you'd like to.
Okay. Was there any one I missed? I can add it on.
Throw out one, which is just what we can do as an institution. So I don't know if you know, the GSC passed a resolution last summer supporting academic freedom in Iran and around the world and condemning the violence against students for all the horrible images we saw in the pictures. And since then we've been observing weekly moment of silence on Fridays at noon, and I encourage everyone to join in. But I just want to ask what else we can do as an institution to support Iran's self-determination and continue to show support.
Very good question. Quick, for your own sake.
So, I guess one thing talking about was the fact that a lot of the things that are happening go back to the people of Iran, their characteristics. My question would be, do you think, well, you said that story about the Patrick Gardner and Nolan and Nani. Do you think that the society, the Iranian society, as a traditional society, as a religious society, as a whole, ready for to make this distinction? As you know, like still, a large portion of people are looking at Grand Ayatollahs and the highest authorities for their main issues and stuff. So do you think that they're ready to do this? And is that considered like success if that happens? And if that is so, is that even possible given the fact that the nominal leader of the movement are highly religious powers or people?
My impression, I don't know if you agree with this, is that the U.S.'s, the nuclear issue in Iran to the U.S. is a very separate issue than the Green Movement and what's going on inside Iran. And I feel that they don't really see the importance of supporting the Green Movement as much in the long-term future of stability in Iran and the Middle East. And my question to you is, why do you think that is? And if you disagree, then what sorts of things have they actually done to support the Green Movement? What sorts of things can they do to support the Green Movement?
Yeah, okay. All very easy questions. Let me go backward to forward. And the last one is a good question about which is the real priority for the United States, the nuclear issue or the character of the Iranian government. I think you're absolutely right, as I said earlier, that when the Obama administration first came to office, the priority was exclusively the nuclear issue. We're not worried about societal dynamics. I think that has shifted. And many people within the administration, I think, increasingly view the potential success of the Green Movement as the only solution to the nuclear issue. There's not been any forward progress on the engagement approach. But politics is a very short-term phenomenon in the United States. The president comes to office, and after a year or two, he's already thinking about re-election cycle. And for this particular president, he has put enormous investment into his policy toward Afghanistan. This has become kind of the centerpiece of his foreign policy. And I'm sure many of his advisors are telling him, listen, you can't afford actually to be too supportive of the Green Movement. You can't afford to agitate too much against Iran because we need Iranian goodwill in Afghanistan. And if you begin to agitate against them too much, they're going to further inflame the situation in Afghanistan, which could hurt your re-election chances. So I think there's a lot of things that are going through the president's head that we don't think about. But certainly I think people who are looking at this outside the context of domestic U.S. politics, I think there's increasingly a realization that we're not going to reach any type of resolution to the nuclear issue with